Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today for Truly Constructible Deliverables, Part 1. My name is Amy Northcutt. I'm the Application Specialist for the Engineering segment here in the US, focused on Tekla Structures. As I was going through creating the material for this webinar, I found that I had way too much to fit into 1 hour. So what I've done is I've separated this into 2 separate parts, the first of which, the left-hand side here, we'll be covering today, Part 1. So there's a few different things that we're going to talk about today. The first is before you start. And so while we're focused on the deliverables, we're focused on the drawings, there are a few things that we can do inside of the model in order to make our drawings more efficient and effective as we're creating them. So we're going to talk about some of those tips before we get started. And then we will talk about drawing creation and some of the different methods and some of the fundamentals of drawing creation. Then we're going to talk about drawing content, the different objects that are available and the different ways that we can represent those on the drawings, and then annotation. So basically anything other than your structural members that's there on your drawing sheet. For part two will be aired March 21st. We will be talking about drawing tools. We'll be talking about even a couple of new tools, or at least a new tool that is being released in the 2018 version of Tekla Structures. We will talk about some management of drawings and quality control of drawings, as well as printing and exporting of our drawings. Okay, so stay tuned for part 2 on March 21st. And let's get started with part 1 now. So let's talk about before you start. So before we start, I want to talk about just the basics of drawings and Tekla Structures, because they are a little bit different than some other softwares that you may have used. And to start off, there's 2 different parts of a drawing. The first is the title block. So this is not at all connected with the 3D structural model, but there may be attributes that we've applied to the model that may be presented here in the title block. In this example here, you can see that we're looking at a title block over on the right-hand side of the screen, but it doesn't necessarily just have to be on the right-hand side. It can be on the bottom. It can be all the way around. It can be however you like. Of course, this is just the example that we're seeing here. And then there's also drawing views. And so here in this particular sheet, we can see I've got 3 different drawing views, one of the plan, one of an elevation, and one of a detail. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the nuances of that. And then I also want to make sure that those of you who are new to Tekla Structures understand that these drawings, they're not just 2D line work. These are actual live sections, or I like to think of it as a live slice through the 3D model. So whenever things are updated in the 3D model, the drawings get updated immediately as well. They're intelligent, and so they also automatically update. And here's an example of that. So right now we're looking at just a little detail of a gusset. I've got a few things going on here, which I'll point out in this model view of that same detail. I've got a W14 by 43 brace, 10 by 49, 14 by 43 beam, a W10 by 49 brace, and a 1-inch gusset initially, right? And we saw all of that back here in this, in our drawing view. I've got the 1-inch plate, the 10 by 49 gusset, the 10 by 49 brace, and the 14 by 43 beam. I've also got one of the other things I wanted to make sure to point out is in this original detail, we've got 6 and 13/16 of an inch to our work point from top of steel here. That was a manually placed dimension. So when I come through and I make some changes in the model and I change this beam to a W12 by 40, I change the gusset, downsize that to a 5/8, and I downsize the beams to, the braces to a W8 by 35. Now, when I open that sheet back up, this drawing view is going to be automatically clouded. All of these pink clouds are just showing me as the user that something has changed since I last opened the sheet. And sure enough, it has. I have the plate has been clouded with its new size. Both of the braces have been clouded with their new sizes. My beam, again, same thing. And then even my manual dimensions that I added in here, now you can see that this is clouded as 6 inches, and Tekla's even trying to show me with some arrows that this moved up. Likewise here, though my 3 inches did not change, the value of the dimension did not change, the location did change a little bit because of all of our geometrical changes, likewise here with our 1 inch. And so Tekla's trying to show me where those move to and from. So that's just an example of the automatic updates that can be taking place in the Tekla Structures drawing. So really helping you manage the changes just in one space in the 3D model. And that's really where we're coming That's really why I've come up with the name Truly Constructible Deliverables, because our deliverables are now based on a truly constructible model that can handle this high level of detail. And so our deliverables, therefore, will be truly constructible as well. Okay. So there's also some hierarchy involved in the settings of Tekla Structures drawings. And so I want to try to make this just as simple as possible, though it can get complex in practice. So the first level here is our drawing level settings. And so those affect everything that's on the drawing. When I first created the sheet, I just had a plan view, so the view right over here on the right-hand side. And so those drawing level settings were created for my plan views. So all my beams are a single line. I've got the beam profile called out in the center line. I've got the columns called out with the leader, so on and so forth. Those are all the types of settings that I have on the drawing level here. The next level, though, is going to be the view level. And since I have these, I have an elevation view here as well as a plan view. You can see those settings and the representation of those parts and the callouts are obviously very different from the way that I have shown my plan view. And so those require different types of settings. So my view level settings here are going to be different from my drawing level settings. But because these settings are created in a hierarchy, or these settings are in a hierarchy, the view settings are always going to override the drawing level settings. And so I've got this handy little graphic here to illustrate that. And then the next level is the objects. So I have settings on individual objects. For instance, if I were to double click on just my brace here in the model, I could adjust the way that it looks, the color, whether it has the reference line, whether hidden lines are shown, so on and so forth. I can adjust all of that on this individual object, and those changes will override both the view settings as well as the drawing settings. Okay, so I have all of these settings for the drawing and the view specifically because I don't want to have to go through and make all of these individual changes on the individual objects. And so by creating my drawing settings and my view settings, sometimes it may be time consuming, especially if you're just starting a new project with a new client or if you're starting Tekla altogether. Some of these may be a little bit more time consuming, but the idea here is that the next time you want to go create a drawing that looks like, say, this plan view or a detail sheet, all you have to do is select that location in the model and populate a sheet with that view. Your settings are already created, and then the additional work that you have to do is minimal. All of your part marks will show up automatically. Your dimensions, at least most of your dimensions can be populated automatically. But we're really trying to reduce the amount of manual work that you're doing to these drawings, oftentimes because humans make errors, right? And so if we can automate this really becomes a data-driven deliverable rather than individual line work created by humans. Okay, so now the next thing I want to talk about is modeling consistency, and this is really a fundamental of 3D modeling and of BIM in general, but it becomes much more obvious when your drawings are linked to your model in the way that they are here in Tekla Structures. And the need for being consistent in your model really does translate down to being effective and efficient when you're creating your drawings. And so the first thing that comes to mind when I think of modeling consistency here is the sort of rule of thumb to model my members bottom to top and left to right. So you can see I have a little tagline here for that. And I even have a cheat sheet. So if I double click on any of the beams in my model, I get the beam properties. And on the position tab here, I have a cheat sheet so that I can know which end of the member is the start and which is the end. So I can see if I selected any one of these beams in my Tekla Structures model now, the left-hand end would show me a yellow handle, and the right-hand end would show me a pink handle. So if I selected all of these members between 1 and 2 here, I would expect to see all of the handles along grid line 2 to be pink and all of the handles on grid line 1 to be yellow. And this allows for just consistency when I'm producing the drawings. Oftentimes we create a part mark, and that would be at a certain length down the beam from the start. Well, if my start is on different sides, depending upon who modeled the beam or when they modeled the beam, then this mark, let me switch back. The mark on my drawing view will be all over the place as well. So that's one of the ways that modeling the orientation of my members can translate into having clean, consistent drawings. Now, the rest of this is really about simply organizing my model. And this can be done in many different ways. It doesn't have to be done in any of these ways, but I find that these few options here, or these few methods of organization really help when creating drawings. So the first of these are organizing your model by phase. I can get to the phase manager here by hitting Control H as in Hector on my keyboard. That's a nice little keyboard shortcut. That's what I personally use all the time. Or I can browse to this from my drawing ribbon. So I can see right here on the on the Manage tab, I have the phases, and that will bring up the phase manager here. Now, with the phases here, let me switch back to an up close of this view. I can put as many phases as I would like. I can number these however I would like. They don't have to be consistent or consecutive 1, 2, 3, 4, just like I have them here. These could be 100, 200, 400, 700, whatever you want. And then the name can be as descriptive as you would like. So likely more descriptive than my phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 here. And so wherever I would like, I can set it up so that I select the members in my model that I would like to be included in that phase, and just hit Modify Phase over on the right-hand side of the button. And from there, you can see in this model that I have as an example, I've got phase 1 shown. This is a tool that we're going to be talking about in part 2, so a little teaser for part 2. But you can see that I've organized this section of the organizer, to be a little redundant here, so that phase 1, all of my members are dark blue. In phase 2, all of my members are light blue. And in phase 3, all of my members are red. And so you can just see visually here that the organization of the model is going to allow me to understand which parts are needed on site when, what needs to be approved first, what needs to be designed first, so on and so forth. And then, of course, what this all builds up to is that I can filter my drawings based upon the phase. Likewise, for the rest of these attributes, or the rest of these things that I'm mentioning here, all of these are really down to, can I filter the model by this attribute? So the next one is the level. And so this is another snapshot of the organizer here, in the bottom of which I can, in the bottom of this image at least, I can see that I have organized my structure into one building, one section, and a couple of floors. And so if I go over to my organizer right now, I can see that same thing replicated here. Now, these were set up based on the grid that I had already created, so this doesn't take more than a minute or two to set up. And then once I've done that, I can select the various floor or even the section or building. And as long as I have Select Objects in Model selected down here on the bottom right of my organizer, those objects get selected in the model. And so I can see really clearly what element has been included on that level. In addition, I left the sort of the 3D spatial boxes that are created when I'm reviewing the spaces that I'm defining here in the organizer. So I can see that I've got this top level. Anything that's included within this top 3D space is in that volume. Likewise, for the middle space, anything that's in that volume will be included along that floor 1 line. And for the below grade, same thing. So everything that's below this, I think it's a 0 level, is included in the below grade area. And if I had any that were that Tekla was unsure about, or that are outside of these bounds, I would have an uncategorized label right below this as well. Okay, so the other thing about these levels, it's great that these are organized, but these levels can also write back attributes to my Tekla Structures members, so that then I can filter by those levels in addition to the phases that I mentioned before. Okay. The next thing that I want to talk about here is the class. And so if I show you an example of a Tekla Structures model, this is using our Tekla Structures default settings for the engineering segment, you can see some consistency among the colors here. Since our typical representation of the Tekla Structures model is by class, so I'm colorizing these members by class, the class becomes pretty important in how I visualize this model. And so you can see that all of my beams in this model are dark green. All of my channels are light green, all of my columns are purple, and all of my braces are blue, and then all of my concrete is gray. So that's one to take note of. All of my concrete, despite what member, is gray. And so that's where perhaps filtering by class may not be as specific as I'd like. But if I would like to filter out all the channels at once, I can easily filter by the class that I'm using for these channels and filter those out. For objects like the concrete, where I can certainly isolate all of the concrete itself, I may not be able to isolate certain parts of concrete based upon the class. And so that's where other attributes come into play. And so one of which that I use a lot and that we use a lot in our default Tekla Structures settings for drawings and filters is the naming convention of our parts. And so in all of our standard options, so if I go to my beam properties or column properties or wall properties, I have a drop down option here and I can load in any of these save settings. And you'll notice that as you browse through those, the angle setting has a name of angle. The beam settings name the part beam. The brace settings may name the part brace. And so that naming is all consistent. So even when I look in the model here, I've displayed the name of these different parts. And all of these are consistent, even down to the capitalization, right? Just having that consistent naming convention is important and helps me to isolate. Perhaps here I want to just filter out the angles. So I could either filter out objects whose name is angle, or I could filter out objects whose class is this gray color. I have a couple different options there, and depending upon what view I'm in, there might be one option that's more appropriate than others. So keep your model organized. Take a look back at this list of organization methods. Of course, there's plenty of other attributes, including all of the user-defined attributes and the material, the assembly prefixes. All of those can be utilized to filter my model. But these are some really handy ways to get started. And if you do decide to organize your model, I would also recommend just writing it down somewhere so that if anyone else joins you on the project or anyone else comes on, after the fact, after you've begun, they can get up to speed quickly on your model organization as well. Okay, so that leads me to our next topic, which is drawing creation. And there's a few different methods that I want to use to create drawings or to show you how to create drawings. But the first of which is the Master Drawing Catalog. And the reason I want to start with the Master Drawing Catalog is because I think it's a little bit underused for engineers. But I think that it has a huge benefit, which is really just that I can visualize the settings that I'm going to be using to create drawings or views before I actually create those drawings. So for instance, over here on the right hand side, you can see that I just have a few different options: a framing plan, a foundation plan, elevation, sections and details, and calc sheets. So for you, once you get going, you might have different flavors of these settings for different clients, and you might have a few different types of framing plans or plan views that you would like to use. Maybe you have a load key sheet and just a traditional framing plan, and you get the idea. So in practice, you'll have more than just what I have here. But when I'm going to create those drawing settings, having that visual really helps me to be able to identify which version of a framing plan am I going to be creating here. What is this going to look like? And really just gives me the additional context, almost like looking at your Windows Explorer view in icon mode versus list mode, right? Those visuals help give us clues, or at least me, because I'm a visual person, and I suspect that many of you are as well. So here's a quick video of us creating some drawings using the Master Drawing Catalog. The first thing you can see that I do already have the views, my model views created beforehand. But then I just go to Create Drawings, Master Drawing Catalog on the ribbon. And now I can see I've got a list of all of these save settings. So I can just right click on whichever setting I want to use and say Create Drawings. And then my traditional Create General Arrangement Drawing dialog box pops up here. Now these three options that are available to me, I'll discuss more on my next slide. But what I can do now is I can select two of those elevation views and just create those using the elevation view, elevation drawing settings that I had just created. And so now my drawing opens up for me, and you can see that I have both elevation views created. Now, I have a little oopsie. One thing that was noted here is that my 3D model, however this view is oriented when I go to create the drawings, is also how this drawing is going to be created. And so you can see my first elevation over here on the left is oriented correctly. My elevation on the right hand side needed to be tweaked, so I'll need to go back and recut that view so that it's oriented in the elevation type view. Okay, so this does bring me back to the Create General Arrangement Drawing, the generic setting. So from any plan view, I can just right-click on the background and say Create General Arrangement Drawing, or I shouldn't say any plan view. From any view in the Tekla Structures model, I can right-click and then just say Create General Arrangement Drawing, which will bring up this dialog that we just saw. Now, I can select any of these views. These are all of the model views that I have created and showed just a few moments ago. But there's a few different options here available to me that I can select. And so for one drawing per view, if I select 7 of my elevations, I'm going to create 7 sheets, one drawing for one view, and I'm going to have a sheet for each of these elevations. All selected drawings to one drawing, or excuse me, all selected views to one drawing would allow me to select all 7 elevations and put those on one single sheet. Or like I just did in the last example, 2 views onto one sheet. And then of course empty drawing would allow me not to select any of these and just to create a blank sheet. Now the other way that I can do this is I can cut sections and details on existing sheets. So this would be applicable if I had created a single view on a plan and I wanted to add additional views to that plan, or I wanted to cut additional views from that plan and then move them onto different sheets. So I might cut a section or a detail and then move those onto my 500 series. Or I might add an additional plan or elevation from the model view, which would be right here on my drawing tab, area in model view, or add entire model view. I can add those model views by just selecting those in the model view as I want to bring those onto the drawings. And then of course I can cut plans, elevation sections, or details using these two tools, detail and section view. The detail view cuts the new view in the same plane as the one that I'm looking at. And then the section view cuts a new view perpendicular to the plane that I'm looking at on the sheet. And I have an example of both of those right here. So I'll start by creating a section view, and the first thing I do is just define the line and the bounding box, the sort of the depth in and out of the page that I'm going to want to see in this view. When I create this section, you can see it's a little too large, the scale is too big, so I'll just double click on this section view and load in some elevation view settings instead, so that's a little bit more appropriate for what I'm trying to accomplish here. Okay, so we can see that looks a lot better. And now the pink view extents here. As I'm dragging those, you can see they're updating over here on the right hand side, and we'll see that a little bit more in a moment. But this is really just showing what area of the 3D model I want to see in this 2D view. So grabbing those pink, the pink handles allows me just to affect that really easily. Now the labels here, you can see I've got, this is called section A on S200, but if I change that to section 1 on S201, that updates in both areas. That updates on the elevation itself as well as the section cut. Likewise here for my detail, I can come in and I can cut a detail view from my elevation view, and you can see that this is in the same plane. And now I have some different settings that I'm utilizing here versus my elevation. But I can also update the view itself, or excuse me, the label here. And when I update this to 2, my detail view is updated as detail 2 as well. So those are going to be linked together. Both the callouts are linked together as well as the graphics. So if I zoom in a little bit here, you can see that I can drag the handle to my pink rectangular box here, and I can drag that over to the left, and when I do that, it isolates that area, but you can see that represented down on the bottom of the elevation as well. And vice versa, I can drag the handle over on the elevation view, and that gets updated in my detail view as well. So those views are linked together in more ways than just the section callouts. The next thing is drawing creation or template creation from a DWG file. And I thought rather than rehash this entire topic, there's actually already been a video created on YouTube by my colleague Dave Hitteman. And so I'm going to provide you with the link here. You can search for it, called DWG to Tekla Template with Tekla Structures. This goes through the process of bringing in a DWG file that is your template, your title block, bringing that into the template editor, adding in the intelligent value field so that every time your project name or your project address or one of your one of the subcontractors on the project, anytime any of their details get updated, it doesn't need to be manually updated on every single sheet. You just do it in one place and all of your sheets will get updated. All of that information is included in this video. So go check out this video on YouTube to learn more about creating those title blocks. And then this probably should be in the next part 2 section, but I was so excited about it I didn't want to take it out from right now. The Drawing Layout Editor is a new tool that enables you to manipulate the templates in your drawings in a very what you see is what you get sort of way. And so I would definitely recommend everybody, especially existing users who have been using Tekla Structures for a long time, go check out the Drawing Layout Editor. Lee Snyder, my colleague, did a tutorial here. It's on YouTube, so you'll be able to get the link, or you can just go search on our Tekla Structures YouTube page for Drawing Layout Editor. Check out this video. This will definitely improve the way that you manipulate your title blocks and move those around. All right. The next section is the drawing content. So here we're really going to be talking about the elements, the structural framing in the model and how those are represented. So I'm getting into the nitty-gritty of object representation and the options here. So at first I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the first section here of my my representation, and then the lines. The additional marks I'm leaving off for the moment because those are more likely to be used on the detailing side of things. And then of course we'll cover the appearance and fill tabs here as well. So the first thing here is the object representation. And so right now you can see I just double click on a part. It's shown as exact. If I change that to outline, I'm going to remove those K chamfers in the corners of my beam. If I change it back to exact, you can see that I can see those again. Those are probably the 2 most likely to be used in this sort of situation, but there's also a bounding box option that it's just worth knowing. This shows you the space, the overall space that this shape takes up. I'm not sure when that would be useful, but there are potentially places where that could be useful, assuming you know that it's there. The next option is the same dialog box, but in a different sort of different context. So I'm using this for a brace where I have not yet applied any connections. And so I'm showing the exact profile right now and then switching that over to a symbol. A symbol would just be a single line, or a symbol with a partial profile. So I can see the shape here and I can understand the orientation. I've defined the length of the symbol here and I can change that as I'd like. And I can also define the offset from the middle. So if I want this to be off-centered, I can define that in either direction, negative or positive. And then let's see, if I zoom back out here a little bit, I can switch this back to the exact representation. We can see that as expected. But you can also see I have the opportunity to decide whether I want to see hidden lines. Own hidden lines would be internal hidden lines. Reference lines, so once I turned reference line on, you can see that I have the reference line here. So if I were showing a symbol with a partial profile, my reference line would continue all the way to the work points. And that's pretty useful for a situation like this. And then I can also offset the symbol itself. So now that I put in a symbol offset here, you can see that that was updated in my drawing view so that the symbol extends either into the beam or beyond the beam. The last option here is for hidden lines and own hidden lines. I wanted to show you a good example of this. So I have a strip footing coming out of the page or in and out of the page behind this pad footing. And so as you can see on the appearance tab, I can change the different ways that that gets viewed. Because this is a hidden line, the visible lines, the color does not affect that. But if I change the visible lines of my pad footing, that does change the outline color here. And then I can also change my fill. So for instance, on this pad footing, I wanted to change the fill to be blue. And so I just adjusted that here on my fill tab and clicked modify. So I have all sorts of different default hatches that I can utilize here, as well as the different colors and line types on the appearance tab. And all of these can be set up in advance. Anytime that you create a setting for any of these objects that you like and you want to utilize again, give it a descriptive name, save it away, and then utilize it again either in object level settings, which we'll discuss a little bit later, or to preload in the future. All right. So the next thing is a bit of what we were talking about in the beginning of this presentation, discussing filtering and how to be able to filter objects and content. And so there's a couple different things that we can do here. You can see over on the right-hand side, I have an example of my view properties filter dialog. And you can see that I'm saying the primary part equals 1, that's fine. The part name contains, and so you can see I'm utilizing that name to filter in many different types of objects. So I only want to see objects whose names include column, pile, footing, so on and so forth. So that's filtering, and we could go very in-depth on filtering. I could probably do an entire webinar on filtering, perhaps I will. But we can also use the hide and show objects tools, which I'm going to show you here. So we'll go through both of those. You can see in this view, I'm looking at some foundations, some piers, and columns. If I go to my filter, you can see this is the filter dialog that we were just looking at on the last slide. So I'm filtering in and out only certain types of objects, or filtering in only certain types of objects, and effectively filtering out anything that doesn't meet this filter, right? So if I want to turn this filter off, all I have to do is come up and uncheck those boxes and then select my view and click modify here. So once I turn that view off, you'll be able to see the difference between what it looks like when my drawing is filtered and isn't. So this would be what it would look like if my drawing wasn't filtered. We can see all of the anchor bolts, we can see the brace in 3 dimensions, the gusset, so on and so forth. Whereas now, when I filtered this, it's much more clear and I can understand much more easily what I'm trying to convey about these foundations. Now I also have the hide and drawing view option, which I just turned on. So I hid that pier, and I can right click on an object and unhide that or show it in drawing view. And so now it's back. You'll notice that when I hid the object, the part mark also got hidden. But I can also hide this from the entire drawing. So if this part I never want to be shown in this sheet, I just right click and say hide in drawing view, and now you can see in both of these different views that part is hidden. And though I can only see a little like a gray ghost of that, that's not actually going to plot. The next thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is grid representation, because there's lots of different ways to show your grids, and I get a lot of questions about these. So the first thing I want to talk is a little bit about visibility. So if I come in and I double click on the grid in my drawing, I can adjust how this looks down to the color. I'm going to make this red so it's really nice and easy to see in this view. I can adjust where the grid lines are visible. So if I want the grids to be shown through the structure or just towards the end here, I can set that up, or I can have them be fully visible, and now you can see them overlapping with my beams. I can change where my grid labels are showing up. So if I click bottom and right now, you can see that I can adjust those to the opposite side. And I can also adjust the extension beyond the intersection. So I'm saying those are 1 inch, and that's in sheet space. I can also, of course, affect the text and the bubble here. So if I want to change the text to different colors and different sizes, I can just type that in, and then I can save these away. Assuming these are the standard that I want to use throughout the rest of the project, I would give these a name, save them away, and load them automatically next time. So this is just me changing the different size of the bubble, which is affected by the size of the text. So I'll make that text a little smaller, and you'll see a slightly different shape of the bubble there. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about is object level settings. And so in order to utilize drawing object level settings, first of all, they're located here on the main section of my drawing properties, and they're also located, we saw them earlier, on the attributes on the attributes tab of my view level settings. And so what object level settings are is they're a combination of a drawing filter and the objects, or the way you want the objects that are included in that drawing filter or the marks to look. So settings for the objects or the marks. And so here you can see I've got a filter that selects the objects you want affected and the object properties you want to apply on all of these objects. And so in Tekla Structures, we've gone through and we've created some defaults. This is the default for a framing plan, and you can go in and you can load these settings. This is exactly out of the box. This is nothing custom. So you should be able to load this in the engineering role. If you're using the engineering role, you'll be able to see these framing plan options, and these object level settings should match yours. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying for a brick wall, I want the part to look like the settings that I've created called brick wall. For the CMU wall, I want them to look like the CMU wall settings. Likewise, if I scroll down, you can see I've got different object types in the center. And then I go on to part marks. Now, so for CIP slabs, cast in place slabs, I want to use the part mark that shows the slab thickness and the top level. For the, let's see, well, anything from secondary parts all the way to wall, you can see I have those set up as no part mark. So I don't want to see a mark for any of these objects. For the different variations of beams and the attributes that I have available, I have a few different options here. And then for columns, I want to see the column and profile. So you're getting the general idea now. What I have to do in order to create those settings is define which of these filters is going to be most specific. And so the way that these are placed in this dialog is also important, because the most specific filters should be at the top and the most vague or the most generic filters should be at the bottom. So what happens is Tekla goes through and it reads this line by line, and so if your object meets the brick wall filter, it will use the brick wall setting and it will go on. And so then it will look at all the rest of the objects, and for the ones that meet the CMU wall filter, it will apply the CMU wall settings, and on and so forth. So you want to make sure to strategically place these in the list, but it is important to understand that they are based on hierarchy. And the other thing is that you don't need to have a filter for every single object in your model. You're only creating these filters for objects that are different from your standard settings, which are just located in your drawing settings or your view settings. So if for most of my parts, I just want to show the profile in a leader as my part mark, I would set that to be my basic setting. And then for anything that I wanted a different part mark, that's where I would have a filter and the setting created for how I wanted that part mark to look, including those that I didn't want a part mark for at all. Okay, I hope that's clear, but let me know if you guys have any additional questions. And there's another handy tutorial video on object level settings created by Dave Hideman. So if you would like to go take a look at that, you can do a deep dive on those object level settings here. Just search for object level settings with Tekla Structures on our Tekla Structures YouTube page, or you can grab this link right here. Okay, so there's some other different types of content, or at least what I'm calling content, that you can utilize on your Tekla Structures drawings. And so a few of those are images, so I can add in JPEG images directly into my Tekla Structures drawings. I can add in DWGs, so typically these are legacy typical details that people have and they've been using since the 80s and they want to keep on using them, and that's great. You can continue to do those or to use those just on the drawing dialog. Just insert a DWG file, and here's an example of that. And then also you can show all different kinds of reference files in your Tekla Structures drawings. So whether these be MEP or plant piping drawings or reference files, models, or whether they be an existing structure that's already been created and you referenced in as an IFC file, or perhaps just an adjacent structure that you want to be shown, the property line is particularly close. All of those files can be brought into the Tekla Structures model environment, but those can also be shown on the drawings. And I have an example shown here. So this is a little bit of a duct, some equipment and some duct work here. And so I can turn these on in my Tekla Structures drawing. And so I can see I've got the box and the little equipment and the ducting going through here in the drawing, and I can affect how these look. Now, this is just a 3D DWG file, so this is not intelligent at all. So I can just change the different ways that I want this to be represented in terms of the color and what different types of Do I want this to be wireframe or solid or so on? I have some different options here for representation. But for IFC files, I did want to note that you can also include IFC files in object level settings. And so if I scooch back a couple slides here, one of these object filters can include different elements in my object level settings. So for instance, if I had stairs that were being designed by others, but they had sent me their IFC, I could show the stair handrails differently than I show the stair treads, differently than I show the stair stringers in my model. As long as I have a filter to isolate the handrails and the stringers, and then I could apply various different object representation settings to those different types of objects. So I want you guys all to be aware that that is a possibility, and I will move on from there. The next thing is annotations. So like I said earlier, this is anything in addition to the physical elements of my structure. So I've got lots of different types of marks that I wanted to go through because some of them look quite similar. For instance, I have part marks and associative notes. All of the marks in green that you see on my page right now, those could all either be part marks or associative notes. Part marks in general tend to be more, those are the ones that are going to be automated. I can only have one part mark per part. However, associative notes, I can't automate the creation of those, but I can come in and select a member, right click and say add associative note. I have all the same types of options as I do for part marks on associative notes, but I can also have more than one. So if I need to add some additional intelligent information, call out an attribute of a part, but in a different mark than a part mark, an associative note is a great way to do that. The other types of marks I have here are level marks. So these define or display the level at the point that you click when you are inserting this mark. So top of footing equals -3 feet, top of steel equals +20 feet, so on and so forth. These are associative, so if I update this member, it will follow, the level mark will follow where the top of steel is or the top of footing. And then I also have weld marks. And so of course, this is just different flavors of weld mark that you can see here, but these can be displayed automatically. I can choose whether I want to display only shop welds or also field welds or both. And so I can display all of these on my model directly from the 3D welds that are I can display these on my drawings directly from my 3D model and the 3D welds shown in my model. Next up is text. So there's a number of different ways that text can be shown in a 2D drawing in Tekla Structures. The first of which is perhaps one of the most common ways, and that is using a CAD reference. So I know a lot of us have historically used big CAD files as our general notes sheets or for sheet notes and things of that nature, and that's still definitely an option. So if you have a CAD file already created, already ready to go, you can just insert that into your Tekla Structures drawing using the Add DWG or DXF button on the ribbon. One step away from that would be basic Tekla Structures text, which I will show you on the next slide in the video. And then the last is an RTF link. So that's a .rtf, so it's a rich text file, and so those can be edited in Microsoft Word, as you see here in the image below, or in WordPad, the program that comes with Microsoft Windows. So you can edit this text, for instance, foundation notes like what you see here, in a really familiar environment that you're comfortable with. You can utilize the lists and the bullet points and tabs and things of that, and all of that formatting will be maintained between the Word RTF file, the RTF file and Tekla Structures. So let's just see that here in practice. First, we're going to put in just basic text. So that's using the text button here. You can see that this is just standard text, nothing associative about that. I can type in whatever I want here, and I can just populate that on my sheet. Double click on that to edit at any point. This is the RTF file. So if I double click on that, that actually opens Microsoft Word. And here you can see that I can make changes to this. So I'm going to go through and just make some very generic changes in italics, bold, colorization, and now when I reload or just click modify on my Tekla Structures drawing, you can see that all of that formatting is maintained and transferred when I update that sheet. And then of course over here on the left, you can see that I have that DWG file that I mentioned, and I'm using that directly over the top of my standard Tekla Structures drawing. Okay. The next thing is annotations in terms. The next thing is dimensions. And so there's obviously multiple different types of dimensions, horizontal dimensions. Oh, let's go back here. Horizontal, vertical, free. I want to talk a little bit about the user coordinate system, styles and tags, associativity, and add or remove points function. But all of that is going to be covered in this next video, and we'll just talk along as this goes through. So horizontal dimensions, I can pick 2 points, and no matter what, it's only going to tell me the direction or the distance in the x direction. Likewise with a vertical point, they can be in dissimilar x locations, but it will show me the y distance between those points. And then a free dimension, of course, just chooses the distance between those 2 points in whatever orientation the 2 points are. All of those dimensions, I can just click and drag them around the sheet. One thing that not many people use, or I didn't use a lot when I was using Tekla Structures, but that's very handy, is to be able to orient your own user coordinate system. So you can see that I just oriented that along the edge of the brace, and now when I choose a horizontal dimension, that's going to be aligned with the new X dimension that I just created. Likewise, a vertical dimension will be aligned perpendicular to the direction that I just specified with my user coordinate system. Now I can reset that back to standard, and once I do that, if I come in and choose another dimension, it will be oriented in the standard way, so up and down like this one right here. There's many different ways that I can address the appearance of these marks. So obviously I can come through and I can adjust the way the tick marks look, the shape and size of the text, the color of the text, but I can also add a number of different types of annotations, like postfix and prefix. And so here I'm typing just a couple examples, maybe clear, if I was dimensioning rebar, or and anything. I can put notes here, top of steel, bottom of steel, so on and so forth, right? I can add these just annotations to my intelligent dimensions so that I can add a little bit more information here. And I also have a few more locations on the tags tab here to add annotations to my dimensions in all sorts of locations there. The last thing that I want to note here is the associativity of the dimensions. As long as you see a tack mark, you know that these dimensions are going to update. Now these dimensions here, you can see those are not actually associated with the edges of that brace. And so I'm going to be very careful when looking at those and assuming that those are going to update if my brace dimension changes. But now that I've added, I can also come in and add additional dimension points like I just did, and you can see that those are also associative. The last thing that I did want to note here is a big point of contention for some people is the background mask behind our dimensions. I can turn that from opaque to transparent so that you can see the line work either behind the dimension or not. That's a pretty important one for a lot of our customers, and so I wanted to make sure to call your attention to that one. Sketch objects are another important feature of Tekla Structures drawings. So up on the drawing tab, you can see towards the end we've got a ton of different tools, and most of these are new or updated and improved tools to enable you to add line work to your drawings as well. And so sometimes, this might be in the form of a whole new dimension. We hope not, because we hope that that information will be actually in the model. But sometimes this can be used to enhance your dimensions. So recently I heard of a use case where people were shading the extents of the gusset plate because it was a stress critical connection, and so they had to show these entire connections a little bit differently for the inspector so that the inspector would know what to look for and where to look for it. So you can use these sketching tools to do that. All of these sketch objects are able to snap to the model content in your drawings, and we also have switches here. So using these switches can help, and it'll show. I have a little video which can show where snapping to the different types of objects can be helpful, and selecting different types of objects can be helpful. So I have my snap toolbar over on the right hand side, and then my selection switch is very similar to the model world here in the drawing side. I can also turn on ortho at any point by touching O on the keyboard. So if I hit O, I can turn on or off ortho, which is pretty helpful when using these snaps. But to take ortho up another level, we actually have custom snap angles that you can set. So just by going to File, Settings, Custom Snap Settings, or Drawing Snap Settings in this case, these can be used for both the model and the drawing side. I can come down to the very bottom where I have the Custom Angles option, and I can just type in the angles that I want Tekla to automatically snap to. And so that allows me, in addition to the 0, 45, and 90 snaps, it allows me to snap to angles or snap to lines along these angles. And so that makes it really handy when I have some sort of funky angle or funky geometry in either my model or the drawing, or of course both. And then the other thing is with these reorder sketch objects, or with the sketch objects, I also have the option to reorder these. And so if I select a sketch object in the model, in the drawing, I can right click and say reorder, and then I have send to back, send backwards, bring to front, bring forward, and then even send behind model objects and bring in front of model objects. So I can decide if these things are hatched, whether I want the hatching to be in front of the model object or behind it. And so I have a lot of flexibility there, and these are fairly new options, very similar to like Microsoft PowerPoint or something of that nature. Back up to the ribbon, I also have trim, extend, and split tools towards the end of these, copy and copy with offset, as well as cover-up tools. So these are tools where I can create polygons and rectangles and lines that always basically block out whatever line work is behind them. So those can be handy as well. So here is an example of what I was just mentioning before with the gusset plate, and I'm going to start with by creating individual lines, and then I'm going to combine those lines to create a polygon and add a fill to the polygon. So we'll see that, and then I'm also going to update this in the model, and we'll see how this polygon follows along with the physical model geometry. So I've traced the extents. I made a little oopsie, so I went just beyond the edge of the gusset plate here. So I'm just going to pull that back, and then I'm going to grab all of my lines here, and I can take those and use the combine tool. So it's over on the right-hand side of my ribbon. I'll just grab that combine lines into a polygon. Just click that once. And now if I interrupt that command, I can select that entire polygon. I can double click on the polygon and I can start adding in, changing it basically. So I obviously just changed that to red so we can see that a little better. And now I'm going to give it a hatch. Okay, so we can clearly see that hatch here. Let's change that to gray. And now you can see that I've got the hatch that's over the top of my elements in my model. If I switch that to the print view, it makes it a little easier for you to see it here. But now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to close this drawing, and I'm going to go see that specific gusset in my model, and I'm going to make some changes. So let's change the brace size here, and of course my connection is going to update so that the geometry is still appropriate. I'm going to change this down just a tiny bit to a 6 by 11. Excuse me, we saw that update. We saw the connection update in the model, but now let's go take a look at what happened in the drawing. Wrong drawing. Let's switch one back. Perfect. And now I can see if I zoom in, obviously my dimension change symbols are happening here, but what I also see is that though my gusset plate changed, the polygon, because it was associative and I snapped to the corners of my gusset as I was modeling it in, the polygon also updated. So I did not need to go back and update that manual 2D line work myself. That updated automatically. Last but not least is symbols. So symbols are really just little tiny bits of line work in Tekla Structures that we've combined into one. And so I can come in and I can use symbols. They're located on the drawing tab here. We've got various different groups. The one that you're looking at right here is called engineering, but there's lots of other groups to explore and just see what types of symbols we at Tekla Structures have created for you that you can utilize in drawings. But you can also create your own symbols using the symbol editor, which has been new and improved. We've got a new UI for the symbol editor, so it's a little easier to use and a little more clear. It's a very simple tool enabling you to come in and add lines and polylines, rectangles, text, and create a symbol. and then you just save this away. You can save this in your firm folder if you have a firm folder, or you can just save it specific to your model in your model folder if you'd like. And then you can start using these symbols in section marks, just on beams, in your drawings in general. The sky is really the limit here as far as the symbols. So those are very easy to use. Just select the one you want to use and click in the drawing, and then they will be located. All right, thanks so much for your time, everybody. That's the end of part 1. If you have any questions, please feel free to type those into the GoToWebinar dialog box, and either myself or one of my colleagues will get back to you with the answers to those. And also, please stay on the lookout for part 2 of Truly Constructible Deliverables, which will be on March 21st. Thanks so much for your time, and I hope you have a great day.